Hello everyone, I am the storyteller and I'm here to help you today. I know you use this video to sleep. So before you do that, please like the video and subscribe to the channel. Where are you from and what time are you watching? Now, relax and listen to my story. It was James and Sarah had been married for 3 years when they finally bought their first house. It was an old Victorian-style home on the outskirts of town with high ceilings, creaky wooden floors, and a charm that Sarah couldn't resist. Despite its age, the house was in surprisingly good condition. The previous owner, an elderly woman, had passed away in the house, but that didn't bother them. As they moved in, they explored every room, marveling at the antique fixtures and spacious design. Then James noticed something strange. The floor plan he had received from the realtor showed 12 rooms, but they could only find 11. Maybe it's just a mistake, Sarah shrugged. But James couldn't let it go. He measured the house's exterior, 40 feet wide, 60 feet long, and compared it to the interior measurements. Sure enough, there was a hidden space in the hallway wall between the guest bedroom and the laundry room. Determined, James knocked on the wall. It sounded hollow. Sarah, I think there's a hidden room. Excited and a little nervous, he grabbed a crowbar from the garage and started prying at the wooden panels. The old nails resisted at first, but after some effort the wall gave way, revealing a narrow doorway leading into a pitch-black space. A musty smell of decay filled the air as James stepped inside with a flashlight. The room was small, maybe 10 feet by 10 feet, but what disturbed him was the child-sized bed in the corner. The mattress was covered in dust, and next to it was a pile of old, yellow papers. Sarah picked up one of the papers and read aloud. Mommy locked me in here again. She said I was bad. I hear voices in the walls. They whisper my name. I want to leave, but the shadow says I can't. Sarah's hands shook as she looked at the date. August 3rd, 1978. James flipped through the other papers, all written in a child's scrawling handwriting. They all described the same thing. A boy trapped in the hidden room, hearing whispers in the walls. Then they heard it, a soft tapping sound from inside the wall. Sarah gasped. Did you hear that? James nodded. He aimed the flashlight at the far wall. The old wallpaper was peeling, and in the dim light, they could see something carved into the wood beneath. A name. Daniel. Then from behind them, the door slammed shut. Sarah screamed. James lunged for the handle and twisted it violently, but it wouldn't budge. Then the whispering began. You shouldn't have opened the door. The whispers grew louder, overlapping, coming from every direction. The walls shook as if something was moving inside them. The tapping sound turned into scratching, deep, desperate scratches like nails against wood. James pounded on the door. Let us out! Then everything stopped. The room fell silent. The door creaked open on its own. James and Sarah ran out, gasping for breath. They slammed the door shut and nailed the wooden panels back in place, sealing the room once again. That night, they barely slept. Every time they closed their eyes, they swore they could hear faint whispers coming from the walls. By morning, they decided to sell the house. As they packed their things, Sarah checked the listing history of the property. What she found made her stomach drop. In 1978, a woman named Margaret Holloway had lived there. She had a son named Daniel. Daniel had gone missing when he was 8 years old. The police never found his body. James and Sarah left that afternoon. But as they pulled out of the driveway, Sarah swore she saw a small figure in the upstairs window, watching them leave. It started with a draft. Emma moved into her new apartment in downtown Chicago, excited to finally have a place of her own. It was a cozy one-bedroom unit on the 4th floor of an old brick building. The landlord had assured her that everything was in working order, except for the heating system, which was a little unpredictable. On her first night, as she was settling into bed, she felt a faint gust of cold air brushing against her cheek. She sat up, confused. The windows were shut tight. Then she heard it, a soft scraping sound coming from the air vent near the ceiling. She stared at it for a moment, her heart pounding. Maybe it was just the old ducts shifting with the temperature change. That's what she told herself as she pulled the covers over her head and forced herself to sleep. But the sound came back the next night, and the next. By the third night, it wasn't just scraping, it was breathing. A slow, deliberate inhale, then an exhale. Emma sat frozen in her bed, staring at the vent. Then, in the dim glow of her nightlight, she saw something move. A shadow. A pair of eyes staring back at her. She screamed and bolted from the bed, flipping on every light in the apartment. The vent was empty. Nothing there. But she was certain of what she saw. Shaking, she grabbed her phone and called the landlord. "Calm down," he said. "It's an old building. The vents make noise. Probably just a rat or something." A rat? Those were human eyes. The next morning, she bought a screwdriver and removed the vent cover. Inside, she found deep scratches along the metal, as if someone's fingernails had dug into it. That night, she locked her bedroom door and left the bathroom light on. At 2:37 a.m., she woke up to a new sound, a soft clicking, like metal being twisted. Then her bedroom doorknob turned. Emma grabbed her phone with shaking hands and dialed 911. She barely whispered to the operator, "Someone is in my apartment." The turning stopped. Then, a loud crash. The vent cover in her bedroom slammed onto the floor. A figure dropped down from the ceiling, a thin, filthy man, his clothes tattered, his face gaunt, and his eyes wide with madness. Emma screamed and bolted for the door just as the police arrived. They found the man hiding in the closet, a knife clutched in his hands. The officers later discovered a hidden crawl space that ran through the building's vents. The man had been living there for weeks, watching Emma through the grates, waiting for the right moment. If she hadn't woken up that night, she might not have woken up at all. Lena had always loved antiques. She spent her weekends browsing thrift shops and estate sales, searching for unique pieces to decorate her apartment. That's how she found the mirror. It was large, with an ornate golden frame, its surface slightly warped with age. The shopkeeper told her it was over 100 years old, a piece salvaged from a burned-down mansion. The moment Lena saw it, she knew she had to have it. She brought it home and hung it on the wall in her bedroom directly across from her bed. That night, as she was getting ready to sleep, she noticed something strange. Her reflection moved a little too slowly. At first, she thought it was just her imagination, the way old glass sometimes distorted images. But as the nights passed, she began to notice other things. When she smiled at her reflection, it kept staring. When she turned away, she felt an icy chill on the back of her neck. One night, Lena woke up suddenly, feeling as if someone was watching her. The room was silent, but the air was heavy. She turned her head toward the mirror, and her heart nearly stopped. Her reflection was already awake, staring at her. A slow, unnatural grin spread across the reflection's face. Lena screamed and threw a pillow at the mirror, scrambling to turn on the lights. The second the bulb flickered on, the reflection returned to normal, just her own terrified face staring back at her. Shaking, she convinced herself it was a dream. Stress, maybe, lack of sleep, but deep down she knew something was wrong with that mirror. The next night, she covered it with a bedsheet. But at exactly 3 a.m., she woke up to a soft rustling sound. The sheet had fallen. The mirror was uncovered, and in the dim glow of the streetlights outside, she could see her reflection standing up. But she was still lying in bed. The reflection tilted its head, eyes dark and hollow, before it stepped forward. Lena tried to scream, but no sound came out. The reflection pressed its hands against the glass, and Lena could hear it, a faint, distorted whisper. "Let me out!" She lunged for the bedside lamp, flipping it on. In an instant, the mirror returned to normal. The next morning, she threw the mirror out. But that night, as she climbed into bed, she felt something was still wrong. She turned off the lights, and in the darkness, across the room where the mirror had been, she could see two glowing eyes staring back at her. Got it. Here is the text exactly as you provided. It started when Claire's baby, Noah, turned 6 months old. Like any first-time mother, she was constantly worried about him. She checked on him every few hours, making sure he was breathing, that he wasn't too hot or too cold. Her husband, Mark, had bought a high-tech baby monitor with night vision and audio so they could watch Noah even when they weren't in the room. The first night using it, Claire was relieved. The video feed showed Noah sleeping peacefully in his crib, his tiny chest rising and falling in steady rhythm. Then at 2:13 a.m., she heard it, a faint whispering coming from the monitor. At first, she thought it was static, but as she turned up the volume, the sound became clearer. Someone was singing, a soft lullaby-like hum. Claire's blood ran cold. She bolted out of bed and ran to Noah's room, flipping on the light. The room was empty, except for her sleeping baby. No one was there. She checked the closet, under the crib, behind the curtains, nothing. Shaking, she convinced herself the monitor had picked up a neighbor's baby monitor signal. That was possible, right? The next night she heard it again. This time, it wasn't singing. It was breathing, heavy, slow, just inches from the microphone. Claire's hands shook as she watched the screen. Noah was still asleep. But then, a shadow moved in the crib. Not Noah, something else. A long-fingered hand reached out from the darkness, stroking the baby's hair. Claire screamed and sprinted to the nursery. The second she opened the door, the crib was empty. Noah was gone. Claire's chest tightened as panic flooded her. She searched frantically, calling his name. But then, a sharp cry echoed from the crib. Noah was suddenly back, wailing as if he had never left. Claire snatched him up, clutching him to her chest. But her eyes drifted to the baby monitor. The screen still showed the crib, still showed Noah, still showed a hand resting on his stomach. But Claire was holding him in her arms. She screamed and yanked the monitor from the wall, throwing it across the room. The screen flickered and died. Mark woke up to find her crying on the floor, rocking Noah back and forth. She tried to explain. He didn't believe her. The next day, Claire threw the monitor away. But that night at 2:13 a.m., she heard it again, a soft lullaby, sung from inside the baby's room. And this time, the crib was empty again. Got it. Here is the text exactly as you provided. Tyler never believed in ghosts. He was a rational guy, a college student studying forensic science, always looking for logical explanations. So when he moved into a cheap studio apartment near campus, he didn't care about the rumors. That place is cursed, his friend warned. The last guy who lived there disappeared, just vanished. Tyler laughed it off. People went missing all the time. That didn't mean the apartment was haunted. The first night was uneventful, just him, his laptop, and a cheap frozen pizza. He was about to fall asleep when he heard it, a faint shuffling noise, like bare feet dragging across the floor. His body tensed. He turned over in bed, staring into the darkness. The door was locked, the windows were shut. It must have been the upstairs neighbor. Yeah, that was it. The next night it happened again, only this time, the sound came from under the bed. Tyler's breath caught in his throat. He lay frozen, his mind racing. Maybe a raccoon got inside, or a stray cat. Slowly, very slowly, he reached for his phone. The screen's glow barely illuminated the edge of the bed. He hesitated, then forced himself to peek over the side. Nothing, just darkness. Relieved, he exhaled and lay back down. But then, a hand shot out, thin, pale, with long, blackened nails. It clamped around his wrist hard, yanking him toward the floor. Tyler screamed, kicking wildly, trying to pry the fingers off. But the grip was inhumanly strong. Then he heard a voice, a whisper, dry and raspy. Don't look. Tyler's heart pounded so hard he thought it might burst. His instinct screamed at him to look, to fight, to see what was holding him. But something deep inside told him to obey. Don't look. So he squeezed his eyes shut and kicked as hard as he could. The hand let go. He scrambled backward, panting, not daring to look under the bed. He grabbed his phone and turned on the flashlight, shining it toward the floor. Nothing. Just the cold, empty space beneath his bed. But his wrist, it was bruised. Dark, finger-shaped bruises. He didn't sleep that night. By morning, he decided he was done. He grabbed his things, ready to leave. But when he opened the closet to get his suitcase, there was someone standing inside. Bent at an unnatural angle, limbs too long, its head tilted toward him. A wide, blackened grin stretched across its face. Tyler ran. He didn't stop, didn't look back. He left everything behind, never returned for his things, never spoke about it again. The apartment is still vacant, and at night, if you listen closely near the door, you can hear it. A soft shuffling, and a whisper from under the bed. Don't look. Jacob lived alone in a quiet suburban neighborhood. A peaceful area, the kind of place where nothing ever happened. Until one night at 2:46 a.m., someone knocked on his front door. 3 slow, heavy knocks. Thump! 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 Jacob sat up in bed, heart pounding. Who the hell would be at his house at this hour? He grabbed his phone and checked the security camera feed. The screen showed a man standing on his porch, back turned to the camera, his posture unnatural, as if his limbs didn't quite fit together. He wasn't moving, just standing there, waiting. Jacob's skin crawled. He turned up the volume, trying to hear if the man was saying something. Silence. Then the man's head twitched, not turned. Twitched, jerked, like a glitch in a video. Jacob's throat went dry. He locked his bedroom door, not daring to go downstairs. Then his phone vibrated, a notification from the security app. Motion detected, back door. His blood turned to ice. The camera showed nothing but darkness. Then, a shadow moved. Something crawled past the camera, fast, inhumanly fast. Jacob's breath came in sharp gasps. He opened his closet, grabbed the baseball bat he kept for emergencies, and pressed his ear to the bedroom door. Silence. Maybe they were gone? Thump! Thump! The knocks came from inside the house. Jacob's heart slammed against his ribs. That was impossible. He checked the security feed again. The front door camera still showed the man on the porch. But the back door camera was disconnected. He wasn't alone. The doorknob rattled. Then, a voice. Low, wrong, like a recording played backward. Jacob, let me in. He did not move, did not breathe. Then the bedroom door creaked open. Jacob never unlocked it, but something was standing in the doorway. Not the man from the porch. Something worse. A shape too tall, its face blurred as if reality itself was rejecting it. Limbs bending in the wrong places. It stepped forward. Jacob closed his eyes, prayed. When he opened them, it was gone. The door was closed. The camera showed nothing, but something had changed. He watched the security feed one last time, staring at the man on the porch. And then the man turned around. Jacob saw his own face staring back at him, smiling, and the thing inside his house laughed. Jacob never answered the door again. But some nights at 2:46 a.m., he still hears it. Thump, 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 and a voice whispering his name. Jacob never answered the door again. But some nights at 2:04 he still hears it. Thump, 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 and a voice whispering his name. At first he tried ignoring it. Then he started leaving the TV on, the radio playing, anything to drown out the sound. It didn't help. The knocks got louder. Thump, thump. The whispers got closer. Jacob, let me in. One night he woke up to find his bedroom door open. He knew he had locked it. The security cameras had stopped working completely, and his reflection in the bathroom mirror was grinning at him. Not his grin, something else, a slow, twisting, unnatural stretch of lips that didn't belong to him. His reflection tilted its head, eyes wide and dark, watching him. Then it stepped out of the mirror. Jacob stumbled backward, his scream catching in his throat. The thing that wore his face took a step toward him, its body twitching, distorting. He bolted for the door, but his own hand grabbed his wrist. Cold, unfamiliar, too tight. His own voice, but not quite right, rasped in his ear. You took too long. Jacob thrashed, kicked, fought, and then darkness. The next morning, his neighbors found his front door wide open. The house was empty. The security camera still didn't work. But later that night, a new tenant moved in. A man who looked exactly like Jacob, spoke like him, laughed like him. But his smile was just a little too wide. Lucy had always been close with her little sister, Emily. Ever since their parents died in a car accident, Lucy had taken care of Emily, making sure she felt safe. But something changed after Emily's 8th birthday. It started with small things. Emily would wake up in the middle of the night, standing in the hallway, staring at the wall. Then she began talking to herself, not like an imaginary friend. This was different. She whispered in a voice that wasn't hers, too deep, too distorted. Lucy tried to brush it off. Kids do weird things. Until the night she saw Emily's face change. It was around 3 a.m. when Lucy woke up to a strange sound, a clicking noise, like someone popping their joints too hard. She turned on the bedside lamp and looked toward Emily's bed. Emily was sitting up, smiling, but it wasn't her smile. It was too wide, too many teeth. Lucy's stomach twisted. Emily? Emily tilted her head, but the movement was jerky, unnatural. Then she spoke, but her lips didn't move. Lucy, you don't recognize me? Lucy's breath caught in her throat. The voice wasn't Emily's. It was layered like two people speaking at once. She scrambled out of bed, flipping on the room's overhead light. Emily was gone, but the bed was still full. Lucy's eyes widened. The blankets were still bulging like someone was underneath. Slowly, with shaking hands, she reached forward and pulled back the covers. Emily's body was still there, but the face was missing. Just smooth, empty skin where her features should be. Lucy screamed and stumbled backward, and then, from the corner of the room, Emily stepped out of the shadows. The real Emily. eyes wide, trembling, tears rolling down her cheeks. "Lucy," she whimpered, voice shaking. "That's not me." Lucy turned back to the bed. The thing with no face was sitting up, and it laughed. Its skin rippled, shifting, stretching, and then it wore Lucy's face. They found Lucy the next morning, curled up in a corner, whispering to herself. Emily was missing. And the thing wearing Lucy's face, it was smiling in the family photo on the wall, even though Lucy swore that picture was taken before last night. And now, every time she looks in the mirror, she isn't sure if the reflection is really hers anymore. Ethan had never believed in ghosts, not until he moved into his new apartment. It was an old building, the kind with creaky wooden floors and dim yellow lights that never seemed bright enough. But it was cheap, and as a struggling college student, that was all that mattered. The first time he noticed the girl in the mirror, he thought he was imagining things. It was late, 2:38 a.m., and he was brushing his teeth when he saw her. A blurry shape in the corner of the mirror, small, frail, like a little girl standing in the shadows. Ethan whipped around, nothing. The bathroom was empty. He exhaled shakily. "I'm just tired." He turned back to the mirror, and the girl was closer. This time he could see her more clearly. She was pale, almost gray, with hollow black eyes and a mouth that seemed too wide for her face. Her head tilted at an unnatural angle. Ethan's stomach twisted. His hands went cold. He turned around again, still nothing behind him. But in the mirror, she smiled. Then the lights flickered, and she moved, not stepped, shifted, like she was skipping through time, now standing just inches behind him. Ethan's breath came in sharp, shallow gasps. He couldn't move. Then she spoke. "Let me out." Her voice was wrong, hollow, like an echo from somewhere far away. The lights went out completely. Ethan bolted out of the bathroom, slamming the door behind him. His heart pounded in his chest. He stood there, trembling, listening. Silence. Then a soft tapping on the bathroom mirror from the inside. The next night, Ethan refused to look in the mirror again. He covered it with a blanket, but even then, he could feel her watching. At exactly 2:38 a.m., he heard it. A small giggle from inside the glass. He ignored it, pulled the covers over his head, forced himself to sleep. But the next morning, the blanket was gone. And the mirror was clean, too clean, like someone had licked it. Then he saw it. His reflection wasn't moving. He lifted his hand. His reflection stayed still. Then slowly it smiled and whispered, "Your turn." The lights flickered and the reflection stepped forward. They found Ethan's apartment abandoned weeks later. The only thing left behind was a mirror. And if you look closely, if you stand in front of it at exactly 2:30 a.m., you'll see him, standing behind you, waiting and smiling. Caleb never should have bought the house. It was old, too old, standing alone at the edge of town, surrounded by thick, dead trees. The real estate agent had practically begged him to take it, offering it for a price too good to be true. He should have asked why. The first night, at 3:12 a.m., Caleb woke up to a sound, whispering. It came from inside the walls, soft, urgent voices, like dozens of mouths speaking at once, hissing words he couldn't understand. He sat up in bed, heart pounding. The voices stopped. Silence, then thump, thump, thump! A slow, heavy knocking from underneath his bed. Caleb froze. He wanted to move, to run, but something deep inside him whispered, "Don't look." He clenched his jaw, heart hammering, and forced himself to lie back down, pulled the covers over his head, shut his eyes tight. The knocking stopped, and then something breathed against his ear. "We know you're here." The second night. He refused to sleep in the bedroom again. Instead, he locked himself in the living room, barricading the door with furniture. He didn't care if he looked paranoid. Something was in that house. The whispering started again. This time, it came from inside the fireplace. Caleb didn't move. He just watched as ash and soot spilled onto the floor, shifting as if something was crawling up the chimney. Then, a hand reached out. Rotten, gray, not human. Caleb screamed and bolted out the front door, heart racing. He didn't stop running until he was halfway down the road. But then, he heard something behind him. The front door creaked open, and a voice whispered from the darkness, "Why are you leaving? You just got here." The final night. Caleb decided to leave for good, but as he packed his bag, something felt off. The house was too quiet. No whispers, no knocking, nothing. Then, something horrible. His suitcase, it was already packed, clothes folded neatly inside, his toothbrush, his shoes, even his phone charger. But he hadn't done that. Then he saw the note, sitting on top of the suitcase. 4 words written in his own handwriting. Don't leave. It's worse. A shadow moved behind him. Caleb turned and saw himself, standing in the doorway, smiling. You should have stayed in bed. The lights flickered and everything went dark. The house is empty now. No one knows what happened to Caleb. But sometimes at 3:12 a.m., the windows rattle, and if you get too close to the front door, you'll hear it, a whisper, begging to get out. Ethan had been living in his apartment for 2 months when he first heard it. A scratching sound, not mice, not the pipes, something else, something inside the walls. At first he ignored it, but then at night he started to hear breathing. Not soft, normal breathing. This was ragged, wet, wrong, like something was struggling to breathe. The first night, at 3:07 a.m., Ethan woke up. Not because of a sound, because of a feeling, a presence. He turned onto his side, blinking in the darkness. His bedroom was silent, still. Then the closet door creaked open. Ethan froze, his stomach twisted, and then he saw it, a pale hand reaching out. Not just reaching, crawling, slow, deliberate, fingers bending the wrong way. A smiling face peeked out of the darkness, its eyes too wide, too black, its mouth open, and from inside his own walls, Ethan heard his own voice whisper, "Let me in." The second night, Ethan sealed the closet shut with duct tape. He barely slept. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw that thing's face. But at exactly 3:07 a.m., his phone buzzed, a text message from his own number. Check the closet. Ethan's hands shook. He didn't move. Then a photo appeared, a picture of him lying in bed, taken from inside the closet. The final night. Ethan decided to leave, but when he walked into his bedroom, his closet door was wide open, and inside there was a hole in the wall, a dark, gaping hole just big enough for a person to crawl through. A whisper came from the darkness. "You made room for me." Then the walls cracked open, and hands, dozens of hands, reached out, grabbing, pulling. Ethan screamed as they dragged him inside the walls. The last thing he saw was his own face staring back at him, smiling. Then the wall closed. Now the apartment is for rent again. People move in, but they don't stay long. And sometimes at 3:07 a.m., if you press your ear against the wall, you'll hear it. A voice whispering from the darkness. "Let me out." It started with a missing person. Mark was a podcaster who specialized in paranormal investigations. His last episode was about the staircase in the woods, a strange urban legend about a staircase that leads to nowhere and what happens to those who climb it. He never uploaded another episode, but a week after his disappearance, his producer received an email. No sender, no subject, just one attachment, an audio file. She pressed play and immediately regretted it. The recording, Mark's voice was shaky, breathless. He was running. "Okay, if someone finds this," he panted, twigs snapping beneath his footsteps. "I don't have much time." A noise in the background, not human, something wet, gurgling. "It's real," Mark whispered. "The staircase, it just appeared." A rustling, then a sudden silence. "I shouldn't have climbed it." Static. Then in the distance, footsteps. But they weren't normal. They were backward, like something was walking toward him, in reverse. "Oh God," Mark choked. "It's coming." A low, distorted laugh. Then a second voice, identical to Mark's. "Why are you running? You already made it to the top." The sound of Mark sobbing. "That's not me," he whispered. "That's not me." Then a sickening crack, and the recording ended. The file deleted itself. The producer tried to recover it. It was gone. But later that night, she got a phone call, no caller ID. She picked up and heard Mark's voice. "Why did you listen?" A pause. Then from just outside her window, a voice that sounded exactly like hers whispered, "Now it's your turn." The line went dead. The staircase is still out there. Sometimes, in the middle of the woods, people hear voices, their own voices, calling them deeper inside. And if you ever see a staircase leading to nowhere, don't climb it, or you'll hear your own voice whisper, "Too late." Lena moved into her new apartment on a Sunday. By Monday, she noticed something was wrong. Her apartment was small, just one bedroom, one bathroom, a tiny kitchen. But that night, as she was brushing her teeth, she noticed something strange. The hallway felt longer. The bathroom door, which should have been right next to the bedroom, seemed farther away. At first, she thought she was imagining things, until she saw the new door, a door that wasn't there before. It was at the end of the hallway, plain, wooden, no handle, and from the other side something scratched. Soft, slow, like it was waiting. The second night, Lena tried to ignore the door, but at exactly 3:15 a.m. she woke up to whispering, muffled voices coming from inside the door. She pressed her ear against the wood. The whispering stopped. Then a single, sharp knock. She stumbled back, heart racing. The door shuddered. Something on the other side was breathing. "Let me in," a low, rasping voice. Lena ran out of the hallway, and as she did, she heard the voice whisper, "Or should I let you in?" The final night, Lena made a mistake. She measured her apartment. The dimensions didn't make sense. The hallway was too long. The space behind the new door shouldn't exist. That night, she locked her bedroom door. At 3:15 a.m., she woke up. The whispering was inside her room. Slow, closer. She turned over and saw another her, lying in bed beside her, eyes wide, smiling. The other Lena leaned close and whispered, "You've been in the wrong room this whole time." The lights flickered, and the real Lena was gone. The apartment is for rent again, but now, when new tenants move in, they always wake up at 3:15 a.m., and the first thing they see is the door, waiting, growing closer, and behind it something whispers, "I let myself in." Dylan loved falling asleep with the TV on. Something about the low hum of static, the faint glow of the screen, it made the darkness less empty. But one night at exactly 3:33 a.m., the static changed. The screen flickered, twitched, and then a face appeared. Not a normal face. Wrong. Its eyes were too wide. Its mouth was too big, and it was smiling. Not at the camera. At him. Like could see him through the screen. Dylan's stomach twisted. He fumbled for the remote. The face moved closer. The screen warped as it pressed against the glass. Its grin stretched, and then spoke. "Can I come in?" The second night, Dylan unplugged the TV. He made sure it was off. But at 3:33 a.m., the screen turned on by itself. The face was waiting. Closer, the grin wider, its fingers pressed against the inside of the screen, like it was pushing through. "I think you left the door unlocked," it whispered. Dylan froze, because he heard his front door creak open. The final night, Dylan threw the TV away. He left it on the curb, screen facing away from his house. But at 3:33 he woke up, not from noise, from a feeling, a presence. His phone buzzed, a picture message, his own bedroom, taken from the corner of the room. Dylan turned slowly and saw the TV, sitting at the foot of his bed, screen glowing. The face was inside the room now. It wasn't smiling anymore, it was hungry. Now the TV belongs to someone else. It always finds a way back inside. And if you ever wake up to a TV turning on by itself, don't look at the screen, because if you see the face, it sees you too. And it never forgets. Elliot was alone when it took him. No struggle, no screams. Just one moment he was there, and the next, he wasn't. But the terrifying part, the world didn't notice, because something took his place, something wearing his skin. The first night, Elliot came home late from work, or at least the thing that looked like him did. His girlfriend, Rachel, barely glanced up from the couch. "Hey, babe," she muttered. "Long day?" The thing in the doorway nodded. Too slow, too stiff. Rachel frowned. Something felt wrong. The way Elliot's head tilted, like he wasn't used to wearing it. The way his smile stretched too wide, like he was still learning how to use his face. "Are you okay?" Rachel asked, shifting uncomfortably. The thing blinked, too long. Then, in a voice almost like Elliot's, but not quite, it whispered, "I missed you." The second night, Rachel woke up to breathing. Slow, heavy. She turned over and found Elliot sitting straight up in bed, staring at her, eyes wide, unblinking. "Elliot?" she whispered, heart racing. No answer. His mouth was slightly open, like he forgot how to close it. Rachel's stomach twisted. She reached out. His hand snapped up and grabbed her wrist. Cold, too cold, and his grip was too strong. "You're not asleep?" she asked, voice shaking. Elliot smiled, but it was all wrong. Too many teeth. Then, in a voice that sounded like it was still practicing how to be human, he whispered, "I don't sleep anymore." The final night, Rachel knew this wasn't Elliot. Not anymore. She waited until he left for work, and then she checked the attic. She didn't know why. She just had a feeling. The hatch was already unlocked. Rachel climbed up and screamed, because Elliot was up there. The real Elliot. Naked, skin missing, still alive. His lips trembled, and in a voice so weak it was barely a whisper, he choked out, "Rachel, don't let it know you found me. But it was too late. Rachel felt breath on her neck. She turned and saw Elliot, or rather, the thing wearing him. It smiled, stretching his stolen skin. "You weren't supposed to see that," it whispered. And then the attic door slammed shut. Rachel never came back down. Elliot still lives in that house, or at least something that looks like him does. But sometimes when people visit, they hear scratching from the attic. And if they listen closely, they hear a voice that sounds almost human, sobbing, begging, "Please, it's still wearing me." Daniel hated mirrors, not because he was superstitious, not because of horror movies, but because of what he saw in them when he was a kid. A man that wasn't him. A man that only moved when he wasn't looking. The first night. Daniel had a long day at work. He got home, washed up, and glanced at his bathroom mirror. His reflection stared back, but something felt wrong. His reflection's eyes were too focused, like it was watching him. He turned away and saw, from the corner of his eye, his reflection didn't move. For a full second. Then it snapped into place, like it had just caught up. Daniel's breath hitched, but he shook it off. Just exhaustion. That's what he told himself, until he turned off the light. And in the darkness, he heard fingernails tapping against the glass. The second night, Daniel covered his mirrors, every single one. Bathroom, hallway, bedroom, he hid them all. That night, he slept better, until a cold breath touched his neck. Daniel froze. Slowly he turned and saw the bathroom door wide open. The mirror was uncovered, and in the darkness he saw himself, standing inside the reflection. Only the reflection's mouth was open, too wide, like it was screaming without sound. Then it moved its lips, a whisper, "Let me out!" Daniel threw the mirror away, smashed it, burned it. But that night at exactly 3:33 a.m. he woke up because he heard breathing, slow, close. And then a voice, his voice right next to his ear. "You broke my door." Daniel didn't want to turn around, but he had to. And when he did, he saw himself standing at the foot of the bed. But the thing wearing his face wasn't smiling anymore. It lunged and the lights went out. Daniel never woke up again. But his house still has mirrors, and sometimes at night, people see a man inside them, banging, scratching, screaming without sound, waiting for someone to let him out. Ethan had an itch. It started as a small tingle on his forearm. By the next day, it had spread to his shoulder. By the third, it was everywhere. It felt like something was moving beneath his skin, and it was getting worse. The first night, Ethan stood in the bathroom, staring at himself in the mirror. His face looked pale, sunken. His skin crawled. He lifted his shirt and his stomach twitched, like something inside was shifting. Then a bump, small, round, pressing from the inside out. His breath hitched. He pressed his fingers against it, and it moved. A ripple like a worm sliding just beneath the surface. His stomach turned. Something was inside him, and it was trying to get out. The second night. Ethan couldn't take it anymore. He grabbed a knife, sat in the bathtub, and cut the skin open. Just a small incision, just enough to see. The skin peeled back. Something blinked, a small wet eye, looking up at him. Ethan screamed. The eye vanished, slipping deeper into his flesh. Then another bump appeared, then another, then dozens, rippling under his skin, watching him from the inside. The final night, Ethan went to the hospital. They strapped him down, gave him sedatives. The doctors said there was nothing there, that it was all in his head. But when they turned off the lights, they heard something moving, a faint, wet rustling. Then, a tear in his flesh. And from the wound, a hand pushed through. Too small, too many fingers. It grasped the edge of his ribs and pulled. And Ethan was gone. Only his empty skin remained. The hospital room is still locked. No one goes inside, but sometimes the walls move, like something inside them is still trying to get out. Logan lived alone, or at least that's what he thought, until one night at 3:12 a.m., his bedroom door creaked open, and someone stepped inside. The first night, Logan woke up paralyzed, not from sleep paralysis, from pure fear. His bedroom door was wide open. A shadow stood in the doorway, tall, motionless, watching. Then it moved, slow, deliberate, stepping closer to the bed. Logan's breath hitched. The figure leaned down, close enough that he could hear its breathing, slow, wet, wrong. Then, in a voice too broken to be human, it whispered, "You left the window unlocked." Then, it was gone. Logan sat up, gasping. His window was open, but the lock was still intact. It hadn't come in from outside. It had come from inside the house. The second Logan locked every door, every window, checked the closets, checked under the bed. He even put a chair against the bedroom door. At 3:12 a.m., he woke up again. The chair was knocked over. The door was wide open, and the figure was already standing next to the bed. Too close. Logan couldn't breathe. It tilted its head, like it was studying him. Then, with a voice like rotting wood snapping, it whispered, "You're sleeping in my bed." Logan's pulse pounded. He wanted to run, but it was between him and the door. The thing leaned closer. Its breath smelled like dirt, like something that had been buried too long. Then it grinned, and Logan saw too many teeth, black gums, needles for teeth, then darkness. Logan woke up the next morning on the floor. The door was closed. The bed was empty, like nothing had happened except for the dirt on his sheets and the whisper still echoing in his head. "You're sleeping in my bed." The final night, Logan didn't sleep. He stayed awake, waiting. At 3:12 a.m., his door opened, but this time it wasn't slow. It burst open, and something rushed in, not walking, crawling, fast, hands slamming against the floor. Its face too long, too stretched, grinning so wide it looked split in half. It lunged, dragged Logan under the bed. He fought, screamed, kicked, but it was too strong, and as he disappeared into the dark, he heard it whisper, "This is my bed now. Logan is gone." The apartment is still empty, but every night at 3:12 a.m., the bedroom door opens by itself, and sometimes, if you stand outside, you can hear breathing, slow, wet, wrong, coming from under the bed, waiting for someone new. Lena lived on the 17th floor of her apartment building. There was no balcony, no ledge outside her window, so when she heard tapping on the glass at 2:47 a.m., she knew something was wrong. The first night. Lena sat up in bed. The tapping continued, slow, insistent. She turned toward the window and froze. A handprint was on the glass, from the outside. She swallowed hard. Her apartment was too high up for someone to be out there. No scaffolding, no fire escape, just open air. And then, the tapping stopped. For a moment, she thought maybe it was just her imagination until she saw the condensation on the glass, like something was breathing against it. And then, a face pressed against the window. Mouth too wide, eyes too hollow, grinning. Lena screamed, and the lights went out. The second night, Lena refused to look at the window. She covered it, hung up blankets, didn't sleep. But at 2:47 a.m., the tapping started again. This time, it wasn't slow, it was frantic, like someone trapped on the other side. Then, a voice. Her voice. "Let me in." Lena's stomach twisted. She pressed her hands over her ears, but the voice grew louder, desperate. "Please, let me in. It's cold out here." She squeezed her eyes shut, didn't answer, didn't move. And then, a whisper, right behind her. "You should have opened the window." The final night, Lena left, packed a bag, got a hotel, stayed on the first floor, no windows near her bed. She thought she was safe, until 2:47 a.m. Her phone buzzed, a notification. She reached for it, heart pounding. The screen lit up, a message from an unknown number, one photo. She tapped it open, and her blood ran cold. It was her hotel window, taken from the outside, and in the reflection, a grinning face stared back at her. Then her phone screen glitched, and in the silence, she heard tapping on the glass right next to her bed. Lena never checked out. The hotel room is still there, still rented out. But every night at 2:47 a.m., guests report hearing tapping on the window, even if they're on the first floor, even if there's nothing outside but a wall. And if they listen too long, they hear a voice, their own voice, whispering, "Let me in." The first time Mark heard the knocking, it was 3:33 a.m. 3 knocks, slow, even, loud. It came from inside the closet. Mark lived alone, or at least that's what he thought. Mark sat up in bed. His closet door was closed, hadn't moved in weeks, but the knocks were real. 3, perfectly spaced. He held his breath. The air felt wrong, thick, heavy. Then, a whisper, "Let me out." Mark's stomach dropped. The voice was his own. He didn't move, didn't breathe. Then, after a moment, the door handle turned, slow, deliberate, but it didn't open. The whispers stopped, and the room fell silent, until Mark heard breathing, not his, something else, behind him. The second night, Mark locked the closet, dragged a dresser in front of it, didn't sleep, didn't move. Then, at 3:33 a.m., the knocks came again, but this time they were louder. And then a scratch, slow, dragging across the wood like fingernails. Mark's body went rigid. Then a voice, but this time, it wasn't a whisper. It was right next to his ear. "Why did you lock me in?" Mark's blood ran cold, his breath hitched, and the dresser moved, scraping against the floor, being pushed from the inside. Mark ran, didn't stop until he was outside, didn't look back, didn't breathe until the sun rose. When he finally returned, the closet door was wide open, and inside, the walls were covered in deep scratches from the inside out. The final night, Mark left the apartment, stayed at a friend's place, felt safe until 3:33 a.m. His friend's closet door creaked open. Mark's breath hitched. Then 3 knocks. Slow, even, loud. Then a whisper. "Why did you leave me behind?" Mark's chest tightened. He couldn't move. And then the closet door swung open, and he saw himself, standing in the dark, but the thing in the closet had no eyes, just 2 deep black holes where they should be, and its mouth too wide, too full of teeth. Then it lunged. The lights went out, and Mark's screams never stopped. Mark is gone. The apartment is still there, still for rent, but every night at 3:33 a.m., tenants hear 3 knocks from the closet. And if they listen too long, they hear a whisper, their own voice, saying, "Let me out." The first time Ryan saw himself, he was standing at the foot of his bed. It wasn't a mirror. It wasn't a reflection. It was him, smiling. But the smile was wrong, too wide, too many teeth. And then it whispered, "Get out." Ryan couldn't move, couldn't breathe, and then it moved. The first night, Ryan locked his bedroom door, didn't sleep, didn't blink. At 3 a.m., he heard footsteps, slow, heavy, coming from inside his room. Ryan's stomach twisted, and the sound wasn't coming from the hallway. It was coming from inside the closet. Then a whisper, his own voice, "Why are you still here?" Ryan grabbed his phone, turned on the flashlight. The closet door was open, but the inside was pitch black, too black, like the darkness was alive, like it was watching. And then it stepped out. Ryan's own face, but the eyes were too hollow, the skin was too stretched, the mouth too full of teeth. And then it ran at him. Past the second night, Ryan didn't go home, checked into a motel, stayed in a room with no mirrors, no closets, no windows. At 3 a.m., his phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number, 1 photo. Ryan's breath stopped. It was a picture of him, asleep, in his motel bed, taken from inside the room. Ryan's fingers shook. He turned on the light and saw his own reflection staring at him in the TV screen. But it wasn't mirroring him. It was grinning. And then it stood up inside the screen. And Ryan realized it wasn't a reflection. It was waiting for him to turn around. The final night, Ryan ran. Didn't stop, didn't sleep, but it didn't matter. It was always 1 step ahead. At 3 a.m., he checked his phone. 1 last message from his own number. "I'm already inside." Ryan's stomach dropped. His hands shook as he slowly looked up and saw himself, sitting across the room, grinning, waiting. Then it whispered, "Your turn." The lights went out, and Ryan's screams never stopped. Ryan is gone. His apartment is still there, but now the mirrors don't work right. They show things that aren't there. And if you look too long, you'll see your own reflection smiling back at you, even if you aren't smiling. And sometimes it whispers, "Your turn." The first time I saw it, I was 11 years old. My family had just moved into a house on the edge of a dense forest. The trees stretched for miles, their dark silhouettes pressing against the sky like twisted fingers. My mother loved the quiet, my father loved the space, but I hated it. Something was wrong with those woods. It started with the knocking. Every night, just as I was drifting off to sleep, I'd hear it. Soft, deliberate taps against my bedroom window. 3 knocks, then silence. At first I thought it was a bird, maybe a branch swaying in the wind. But then one night I heard something else. Breathing, heavy, too close. I didn't dare move. I pulled the blanket over my head and squeezed my eyes shut, waiting for it to stop. And then, ever so softly, a whisper. "I see you." I wanted to scream, but my throat locked up. I told my parents the next morning, but they only smiled. "It's just your imagination." That night, the knocking came again. 3 slow taps. I turned my head just enough to see the window, and my heart stopped. There was something standing there, not a person, not an animal, something wrong. Its skin was too pale, almost gray under the moonlight. Its limbs were too long, its fingers too sharp, and its eyes, it didn't have eyes. Just empty, hollow sockets where they should have been. And yet, I knew it was looking at me. It smiled, a thin, jagged grin. Then it raised 1 long finger, pressed it to the glass, and whispered, "Come outside." I ran. I didn't sleep for days. I kept my curtains shut, but it didn't matter. I could feel it watching, every night, waiting. Then one evening, my little brother vanished. Mom thought he wandered off. Dad called the police. They searched the woods for days, but I knew where he was, or rather, who had taken him. And I knew deep down that if I looked out my window that night, I'd see it again, smiling with my brother's face. And if I opened the door, I would never come back. I never looked. I never went outside again. But sometimes late at night, I still hear the knocking, still hear the whisper through the glass. "Come outside." And I wonder, if I ever do, will anyone ever find me? The first time I noticed it, I was 8 years old. A small door in the basement, about 4 feet tall, set into the concrete wall. My dad said it was just a storage crawl space, but I never saw him open it. And sometimes, late at night, I would hear knocking from the other side. By the time I was 12, I learned to ignore it. My parents didn't believe me when I told them about the sounds. "Old houses creak," my mom would say. But this wasn't creaking. This was knocking. 3 slow taps. Sometimes a whisper, too soft to make out the words. And sometimes the handle twitched, like something was trying to open it from the inside. One night during a bad storm, the power went out. I was home alone. The wind howled outside, shaking the windows, and I could hear tree branches scraping against the roof. Then, a noise from the basement. Not the wind, not the house settling. Something moving. The sound of fingernails dragging across wood. Then, 3 slow knocks. I stood at the top of the basement stairs, holding my breath. The flashlight in my hand flickered. Then I heard it. A voice, right next to my ear. "Come down." I ran to my room, locked the door, and hid under my blankets, heart hammering so hard I thought I might pass out. I didn't sleep that night. The next morning, my dad found me on the floor, clutching the flashlight. He frowned when I told him what I heard. Then, for the first time in years, he went into the basement. He pulled the old metal shelf away from the small door, tried the handle, it was unlocked, and when he pulled it open, there were scratches on the inside, deep gouges in the wood, as if someone had been trying to claw their way out. Dad slammed the door shut, locked it, and without a word, nailed it shut. He never spoke about it again. But that night, as I lay in bed, I swear I heard it, the soft sound of nails against wood. And then, just before I fell asleep, 3 slow knocks and a whisper from beneath the floorboards. When I was a kid, my grandmother had one rule in her house: never look in the mirror after midnight. I thought it was just a silly superstition, something old people said to scare kids. But I was wrong. The summer I turned 10, I stayed with her for a few weeks. Her house was old, one of those 2-story farmhouses with creaky wooden floors and heavy furniture, the kind that always felt too dark even in the daytime. The bathroom had this huge antique mirror, the kind that was slightly warped, like the glass wasn't quite right. Every time I brushed my teeth, I felt like my reflection was watching me a little too closely. One night, I woke up thirsty. It was past midnight. The house was dead silent, the kind of silence that makes your ears ring. I crept down the hall to the bathroom, not even turning on the light. I was about to leave when I glanced at the mirror, and my reflection didn't move. I froze. My breath caught in my throat. I lifted my hand. My reflection lifted its hand, but something was wrong. It was smiling. I wasn't. My stomach dropped. I took a step back, and so did my reflection, but its smile widened, and then it whispered. I don't know how. The sound wasn't in the room. It was in my head. Let me head. Let me out. I ran. The next morning, I told my grandmother. Her face went pale. She grabbed my arm hard and whispered, "Did you touch it?" I shook my head. She exhaled, looking relieved. Then she made me stand outside while she covered the mirror with a black sheet. For the rest of the summer, I wasn't allowed to go near it. But at night, in the dark, I could hear it. Scratching. Soft, slow scratches, like fingernails against glass. And sometimes, just before I fell asleep, a whisper. I see you. I never looked in a mirror after midnight again, and you shouldn't either. The power went out at 11:13 p.m. I was home alone, curled up on the couch, watching a horror movie, when suddenly, blackness. The entire house went dead silent. At first, I wasn't scared. Power outages happened all the time. I grabbed my phone and turned on the flashlight, sighing as I got up to find some candles. That's when I saw him. A man standing at the end of the hallway. Tall, too tall. His head was bent at an unnatural angle, almost touching the ceiling. His arms hung too low, fingers nearly scraping the floor. But the worst part, he wasn't moving. Just standing there, watching me. My breath caught in my throat. I hadn't heard anyone come in. The doors were locked. I slowly lifted my phone, pointing the flashlight toward him. Nothing. The hallway was empty. I let out a shaky breath. Maybe my eyes were playing tricks on me. Maybe it was just the shadows. But then, I heard it. A slow, deliberate step, right behind me. I spun around. The flashlight beam cut through the darkness, but there was nothing there. I was alone, but I could feel it. Something wasn't right. The air was thick, wrong, like the room was smaller than it should be. Then I saw it, the reflection in the window. A tall, twisted shape standing right behind me, grinning. I ran. I locked myself in my bedroom, heart hammering in my chest. My phone battery was down to 3%. The dim glow barely lit up the room. Then, from the darkness, a whisper. You can't see me, but I can see you. The closet door creaked, slowly, opening, inches at a time. The light on my phone flickered, then died, and the last thing I heard before everything went completely black, soft breathing, right next to my ear. Then got you, and I felt fingers wrap around my wrist. The power came back on at 6:42 a.m. The closet door was wide open, and on the mirror, written in long, jagged scratches, next time, no lights. It started with the knocking, 3 a.m. every night, always the same. 3 soft knocks. I live alone in a small apartment on the 4th floor. There's no balcony, no fire escape. The only way in is through the front door. But the knocking, it comes from inside my closet. The first time I thought I imagined it. Maybe I was dreaming. The second time, I was fully awake. 3 soft knocks coming from inside the closet. I grabbed my phone, turned on the flashlight, and slowly walked toward it. I placed my hand on the doorknob, took a deep breath. Then, from inside, a whisper, "Don't." I yanked my hand away like I'd been burned. I didn't sleep that night. I started locking the closet before bed, even put a chair in front of it. But at 3 a.m., I woke up to the sound of the lock clicking open, the chair scraping across the floor. Then, 3 soft knocks, right behind the door. I wanted to run, wanted to leave the apartment and never come back. But I couldn't move, I couldn't even breathe. Then, in the dark, I heard it whisper, "I see you." The door creaked open, just an inch. I grabbed my phone, turned on the flashlight, and shined it into the gap. And I saw it, a pale hand with long, broken fingers reaching toward me. I screamed. The hand snapped back into the darkness, and the door slammed shut. The next day, I nailed it shut, duct taped the edges, even pushed my dresser in front of it. But that night, at 3 a.m., I woke up to the sound of nails hitting the floor, the tape peeling away, the dresser moving, and then 3 soft knocks, right against the wood, followed by a whisper, "You can't keep me out." I haven't opened the closet since, but every night I hear it, waiting. And I know, one night when I least expect it, the door will open on its own. I was 6 years old the first time I heard it, a soft, scraping noise coming from under my bed. I thought it was a rat, maybe an old toy shifting around. But as I lay there frozen, I realized something. It was breathing. I wanted to scream for my parents, but I was too scared. Instead, I squeezed my eyes shut and pulled the blankets over my head. The sound continued, slow, shallow breaths, just inches beneath me. Then, a whisper. "If you move, I'll know." I stayed awake until the sun came up. By the time I was 10, I had almost convinced myself I imagined it. Almost. Until one night I dropped my favorite stuffed animal. It rolled under the bed. I reached for it. Something grabbed my wrist. I yanked my hand back so fast I scraped my palm on the floor. My heart was hammering. I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. Then, from below, a voice. "You're getting too big to fit under here." I never slept in that room again. Years passed. I moved away, went to college, got an apartment. I never told anyone about what happened. Then last week I got a call. My parents were selling the old house. They wanted me to come back, pick up anything I wanted to keep. I almost said no, but I didn't want to be afraid anymore. So I went. The house felt smaller than I remembered, empty. My old room was exactly the same bed, same closet, same dark space underneath. I don't know what possessed me to do it. Maybe I wanted proof. Maybe I wanted closure. But I got down on my knees and looked under the bed. There was nothing, just dust and old toys. I let out a shaky laugh. I had been afraid of nothing all these years. Then I heard my old closet door creak open and a voice behind me, "You're finally back."